Hey, what's up, guys? I hope you guys are doing good. I've been praying for you guys. I've been thinking of y'all. I just wanted to share a quick video just to encourage you guys. It's just a little bit easier to do the video than it is to type it all out. So I'm gonna share with you guys a little story from the book of Genesis. This story is the story of Joseph. I know some of you guys might know it. It actually covers 17 chapters of Genesis, which only has 50 chapters, so I'm not going to read it to you guys. You guys can read that in all your spare time. But basically, there was this guy named Joseph, and his dad, his name was Jacob. And so Jacob, he had multiple wives, and then he ended up having 12 children, and Joseph was his favorite child of them all. He was the youngest, so of course he had 11 older brothers who weren't happy that he was the favorite. And so his dad actually favored him better than all of his other brothers. He even gave him a coat that was more special and that was better. And so his brothers, they did not like Joseph at all. And actually Joseph, he had dreams that he would be a ruler, that he would be a leader, and that all of his brothers would bow down to him, including his dad. And so he's not too smart, so he tells his brothers about his dreams, that he's going to be in charge one day, and that all of them are going to bow down to him one day. And his brothers, they did not like that one bit at all. So his brothers, they actually, they make a plan to try to kill him. They want him gone, they want him out of the picture, and they think that if they just kill him, it would all be all right. So they had this plan, and then they almost carry it out, but then one of the brothers was like, no, this isn't a good idea. Maybe we'll just sell him as a slave. So they ended up, these people are coming by, and they sell their younger brother Joseph as a slave. And then they lie to their father and say that he was eaten by mountain lions or something crazy like that. So now his dad, he's really sad. His brothers are like, yeah, we don't know. We think he's dead. We don't know where he's at. We don't even care anymore. But all the while, Joseph, he's sold as a slave, and he is sold to Egypt. And so he ends up being a slave to one of the rulers in Egypt. His name is Potiphar. And I don't know if that's his name, but I think that's a title. Potiphar, I think it's some kind of, it'd be like a vice president. So he ends up being a slave for somebody who's like the vice president. And so he is doing his normal thing, and long story short, he ends up going to jail from being falsely accused of some misconduct. And so now Joseph, not only was he a slave, but now he's a slave in Egypt. And so he's still able to have these dreams, and he's still able to interpret dreams. God is giving him the ability to interpret dreams. And so he tells, there's some other people in prison with him. He interprets their dreams for them. One person actually gets out, and he works for the Pharaoh. He works for the leader, the person in charge of all of Egypt. And so he gets out, and then the Pharaoh, the guy in charge, he ends up having a bad dream. And it's a kind of a crazy dream. He's like, I need somebody to interpret this dream for me. And so he calls in his magicians, he calls in all of his magic people, all of his wizards, and he has them try to interpret the dream, but they can't. And he's like, there has to be somebody. And then finally, the guy who works for him, who was in prison with Joseph, he's like, hey, I know a guy. He used to interpret dreams for me whenever I was in jail. So the Pharaoh, he's like, okay, go get this guy. We'll go get him out of jail. He'll interpret the dreams. And so Joseph comes, he interprets the Pharaoh's dream. And the dream was actually that they were going to be in famine. Well, first they're going to have 7 years of abundance. They're going to have 7 years of tons of grain, tons of harvest, tons of money coming in. But then they're going to have 7 years of famine, of there being no food, no rain, and nothing. So the Pharaoh, he actually puts Joseph in charge. So at this point in the story, Joseph is now second in command. And so the 7 years of abundance come. There's so much food, there's so much grain. Joseph is in charge of building all the silos. And so he's building all these storage places for all the grain to go in. So long story short, that 7 years go by, all the bins are full, and then the 7 years of famine hit. And so the whole world, they are without food. But they hear that Egypt has prepared, and Egypt has all this extra food. So all these people they're coming back to Egypt to try to get food because they're in famine. There's no food anywhere in the world. And so Joseph, he is in charge now of distributing the food. He decides who gets what food and when. And so long story short, Joseph's brothers and their dad Jacob, in Israel, there's no food there either. So they actually come back to Egypt to try to get food, and they don't notice that Joseph is the guy in charge. And so Joseph, he plays games with them. He messes with them. He ends up trying to capture one of their brothers. He scares them. He makes his dad come. And then he reveals who he is. And then his brothers are scared. His brothers, they end up bowing down to him. Joseph's the main guy in charge. And his brothers, they have to bow down to him. And so this gets us down to Genesis chapter 50, verse let's say 16. It says, so they sent message to Joseph. This is right after Joseph's dad dies. He says, before our dad died, your father gave a command. He says, say this to Joseph. Please forgive your brothers' transgressions and their sins and suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servant of God of your father. So basically, Joseph's brothers, their dad dies, and they want Joseph to forgive them for all the crap that they did, selling him as a slave. And so they make up this lie that Jacob wanted him to forgive. It says, Joseph wept when the message came to him. His brothers came to him, bowed down before him, and said, we are your slaves. And now Joseph's older brothers, they're saying that we are your slaves. But they're in verse 19. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me, but God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. So Joseph, he had every opportunity to see what was happening as a very bad thing. Being sold, being left for dead by his brothers, being sold as a slave, being put in prison multiple times. He had every opportunity to be bitter, to be mad, to see the whole world of chaos as something to complain about. But instead, he sees it through God's perspective. He says, you guys meant this for evil, but God knew what he was doing, and he meant it for good. Right now, I know we're living in a crazy time. It seems like evil is all over the place. Bad things are happening. Schools are getting canceled. Everything is still shut down. And we see this as an opportunity just to complain and be like, why is everything going wrong? But what if we look at it through the lens of Jacob? You guys meant this for evil, but God meant it for good. How do you guys see God working for good in the midst of all this? It's going to come to an end one day. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be next week. But one day this will be, everything will be back to normal. So whenever we look back at this, how are we going to see God working? How are we going to see God move? And we'll be able to say that God meant all this for good. Love you guys. I'm praying for you guys. Let me know what you think.